so let's start with the experim.save file, and you should have pulled that up by now and have that open, and just go to variable view, and I'm just going to point out what these variables are pretty quickly. Again, these are data coming from a file that's used in chapter 20 in Pallant. So if you wanted to go through this and follow this at home, you certainly can. So what I'll do is I'll just talk about the variables real quickly. Sex is an obvious one, males or females. Age of participants is included, and then really what this data file is, it's fictitious data showing results of two types of intervention to help people with their anxiety about statistics. In the first intervention, it was a course designed to teach people math skills. Okay, and I guess the thinking is that if you can build up somebody's math skills, they'll drop their fear of statistics, or at least it will reduce to some manageable level. The other course was a short course in confidence building, how to build up somebody's confidence, but didn't necessarily teach math skills. So the idea here is, okay, is there a difference in terms of outcomes over time, for example, in terms of how fearful somebody is of statistics, based on whether they completed the math skills course or the confidence building course? Okay, so that's the group variable. And then there's three dependent variables. FOST refers to fear of stats, and it's measured 3 times: pre-test, post-test, and then follow-up. Confid is confidence in terms of being able to complete a statistics course, and that's pre-post and follow-up as well. And then depression, how depressed somebody feels about having to take statistics, which is probably something you might relate to, right? So those are our major variables, and then you see these sort of reiterated again: FOSS 2, confidence 2. That's just the second time point assessment, and then the follow-up assessment down the road. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and run the data. So we're going to click Analyze, and we're going to go to General Linear Model and then Repeated Measures. So we click on that, and it's going to prompt us. It's going to say, okay, I want to know, SPSS is saying, I want to know what that within subjects factor is. Give it a name. Okay, now because these are measures done over time, let's just call it time. And we know that there are 3 measurement points. There's pre-test, post-test, and then follow-up. So we'll say, okay, 3 levels. And we click Add. So you should get something that looks like that. Then we're going to click Define, because SPSS is going to want us to define the levels. Okay, it needs to know which variable to pull from. Well, we're going to use, for our first analysis, fear of stats as the dependent variable. So we'll pass over time 1, and then time 2, and then fear of stats at time 3. Now, the other thing we can't forget to do is we need to define for SPSS what the between subjects factor is, and that's going to be type of class taken, right? Remember, they took either a skills building course or a confidence building course. All right, so we're going to pass that over. So your screen should look like this. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Options. I'm going to click Options, and you'll see that there's a bunch of stuff up here that we're going to ignore for now. We're going to click Descriptive Statistics, Estimates of Effect Size, and then Homogeneity Tests. And again, I'm just going right through what Pallant does in chapter 20. So you'll be able, if you want to go back to the book, you can walk right through this example too. So we'll click Continue. That's for options. And then we're going to go to Plots, and I want to plot out the graph. And so typically what we're interested in is change over time. So that should be the horizontal axis. And then the groups will represent separate lines. I'm going to click Add to make sure to add those. Okay. I'll click Continue, and at this point I'm pretty much done. We're not going to worry about the post hoc test for now. I'm going to click OK. So we click OK, and up comes the output. And there's a lot of output that comes up with this, but really, and it's a little bit tricky, so just kind of follow through as I walk through this. Because it is a little bit different than simply doing a within subjects one way. Repeated measures. So up comes the basic stuff up front. We've got definition of our variables, the n per group. Okay, so there's 15 in the math skills, 15 in the confidence building, so it's relatively small numbers. And then breaks it down by the means across time 1, time 2, time 3 for math skills and confidence building. So just inspect those and see. It sure looks like the means are going down a little bit at least. 39.87 at time 1 for the math skills group, 40.47 for confidence, and then the fear is going down a little bit over time. So we'll see what kind of effect we get there. Okay. Now, when we come down here, you'll see what you saw before in the repeated measures ANOVA. And you'll see Mockley's test of sphericity, and you're going to want to kind of interpret that. Okay. Well, there's actually, now that we've moved into a mixed design, we actually have some other options to evaluate the within subjects factor, and I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on that. But the sphericity assumption, as we've talked about, is frequently violated. And we can sort of sidestep that a little bit by going and using what are called multivariate tests. So there's some slightly different math that's used within the multivariate tests, and all we need to really do is come down here and check for equality of error variances. Okay, and when we come down here to quality of error variances, sure looks like there's no issues to be thinking about. We get non-significant effects here for the error variances for time 1, time 2, and time 3. And then what we do is, instead of going to this tests of within subjects contrast, or the tests of within subjects effects, we're just going to come back up here to where it says multivariate tests. Okay, and we're going to start by looking at the time by group interaction to see if there is an interaction between the repeated measures over time and our two groups, the statistics skill building group and the confidence building group. And we're going to look down here at what's called Wilks lambda, and then kind of look across to the p-value. And what you notice right here on the p-value is it says 0.150. Okay, what that indicates to us is that there was a non-significant interaction effect. Okay, so once we check out the interaction effect, then we can go look at main effects. Okay, so we have a non-significant interaction effect. And then for Wilks lambda, when we come up to time, we come up here and say, okay, we look across and we see that there is a significant main effect for time. Okay, so Wilks lambda is 0.337. It is reconstituted into an F ratio of 26.593. The main point here is the p-value, which is less than 0.001. So we're going to have a main effect for time. And that means that over time, irrespective of the treatment that they were receiving, we saw a decrease in scores on a fear of anxiety. Okay. Now, to test whether or not there is a main effect for the actual treatments that they took, whether there was a difference in terms of the treatments and how much folks improved, I'm going to come down here and look at group in the tests of between subjects effects. Okay, so when I come down here and I look at group, I just look straight across to the F ratio, which is 0.059, and then a significance level of 0.810. So what this tells me is that I have a non-significant effect for group differences. Okay, so let's sort of summarize the results here. I go back up here to where it says multivariate tests. I say, okay, is there an interaction effect between the treatment and time? The answer was no. The p-value is 0.150. When I come back here to time, I say, okay, is there a main effect for time? In other words, do folks seem to become less anxious about statistics over time? And the answer was, yeah, it sure looks that way. And it didn't really seem to matter what treatment they went through, which intervention class they had. And then I come down here to the tests of between subjects effects, which tests for any difference between the stat skills course and the confidence building course, and I find no significant difference there. So when you look, when you look down at the graph, then when you look at the graph, then that should make sense, right? So what's happening here? Here's our confidence building course, and you can see the means are just dropping out, and then the math skills course, and the means are dropping down. So individuals from both courses are, in fact, becoming less anxious about statistics over time. But there doesn't seem to be much of a difference between them. Sure, those lines cross, but for the most part, they're parallel with one another. Okay, the intersection is, not a significant effect here at all. That's why we got an insignificant interaction effect. So for the most part, these are really kind of close outcomes between the two courses. And the only thing that we conclude is that there is a main effect for time. Okay, so when you go in to read the write-up that Pallant has in chapter 20, here's what Pallant says. Pallant says a mixed between-within subjects analysis of variance was conducted to assess the impact of two different interventions, math skills confidence building, on participants' score on the fear of statistics test across 3 time periods: pre-intervention, post-intervention, and 3-month follow-up. Okay, so that's just describing what happened. Then in the write-up, Pallant writes, there was no significant interaction between program type and time. Wilks lambda equals 0.87. So right there, no interaction effect. The value of Wilks lambda is 0.87. Okay. F227. Okay. So our F, degrees of freedom, you'll see if you look across Wilks lambda, 2, 27, right here, equals 2.03. So here's our F right here, 2.03. The probability of that occurring by chance or measurement error is 0.15, right there. And partial eta squared, our effect size is 0.13, but you don't really need to report that because it was a non-significant F ratio to begin with. Then what Pallant says is there was a substantial main effect for time. Wilks lambda 0.34, right here. F227, there's the degrees of freedom, equals 26.59, right here. The probability of obtaining this F ratio by chance or measurement error less than 1 in 1,000, so P less than 0.001. Partial eta squared equals 0.66. Okay, so all of that in the paragraph in the write-up, it's on page 288 in Pallant, is right there. Okay, so partial eta squared 0.66, with both groups showing a reduction in fear of statistics scores across the 3 time periods. See table 1. Okay, you'd have to look that up in Pallant. The main effect comparing the 2 types of interventions was not significant. So where would we find that? We go down here to tests of between subjects effects. So it says the main effect comparing the 2 types of intervention was not significant. F128, so here's the 1, and then there's the error degree of freedom right there, 128, equals 0.059, right there, and then P equals 0.81, right there. Partial eta squared 0.002, although again, I wouldn't report that. Suggesting no difference in the effectiveness of the 2 teaching approaches. And then Pallant provides a little table that sort of summarizes the means and standard deviations and so forth. Okay, so that's kind of a walkthrough of the analysis for a 2x3 mixed design. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. So what we're going to do in the next exercise is something similar to what we did here, but with a different dependent variable.